When my husband was sentenced to 5 years in Black Beach prison, my world collapsed in a slow, choking silence. One day, we were laughing over dinner, arguing about what movie to watch, and the next, I was standing behind a glass wall, watching the man I loved in a faded uniform with chains around his ankles. He mouthed "I love you" before the guards pulled him away, and that was the last time he looked like the man I had married. They said he embezzled money, my husband. They called him a criminal, a disgrace to his office. I called him innocent. I still don't know if he did it. Maybe I didn't want to know. The worst part wasn't the cold bed at night or the empty seat at the table. It was the silence. Silence from our friends. From the government. From the church. From God. In that silence, I began to drown. Bills piled up. Friends disappeared. And the shame that was heavier than anything. That's when I met Balthasar in Gonga. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look at me like I was broken. He was polished, powerful, the kind of man whose presence made people sit up straighter. He was the director of the National Financial Investigation Agency. The same agency that had helped investigate my husband. When he first approached me, I thought it was a trap. But his eyes, they were too knowing. Too human. "I know what it's like to be betrayed by the system," he said one evening, as we sat across from each other in a discreet little restaurant in Molobo. "Sometimes, we have to do what's necessary to survive it." He offered help. Not just financial but legal, political. He said he could reduce my husband's sentence. At first, I was disgusted. I said no. But then I went home and sat in the dark and stared at the wall, wondering if I'd ever feel sunlight again. And slowly, my morals began to rot under the weight of desperation. It started with late-night calls. Then dinners. Then weekends out of the city. I told myself it was just to help my husband. That I could endure anything for him. But the truth is, I began to need Balthasar. He listened when no one else did. He held me when I broke down. And I hated myself every time I smiled around him. He was a man of contradictions, cold in meetings, warm in private. I saw the monster and the man. And I let myself fall. I remember the first time it happened. The sky had broken open with rain, and we were in his house overlooking the water. I was crying about my husband. About how his letters had stopped. About how I wasn't sure if he hated me now. Balthasar didn't say anything. He just wiped my tears. And then I kissed him. I don't know who kissed who first. Maybe it doesn't matter. After that night, I became someone I didn't recognize. A woman who lied to herself every morning. Who looked in the mirror and saw a traitor. But I couldn't stop. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it was for love. But deep down, I knew I was just lonely. He said he loved me once. I laughed. "You love a woman who betrayed her husband. You love a man who put him there," he replied. It was true. He was responsible. And I still stayed. Because he was the only person who made me feel seen. Months passed. 10 years. One day, I received a letter. My husband was being released early. 4 months early. I should have been overjoyed. I should have screamed. But all I felt was terror. Because the man I had fought so hard for was coming home to a stranger. A woman who had fallen into bed with his enemy. I met him at the gates. He looked smaller, like prison had drained the life from him. He hugged me like a dying man clinging to the last thing he loved. And I cried. I cried because I didn't deserve that embrace. He never asked what happened while he was gone. And I never told him. But some nights, when the guilt gets too loud, I lie awake and wonder if he knows. If he feels it in the way I flinch when he touches me. If he sees it in the way I look past him when he speaks. Botesa disappeared shortly after my husband's release. Rumors say he left for Spain. Others say he was forced out. I never looked for him. I couldn't. The story was over. But the damage wasn't. I live now in a house that feels half full. I have a husband who loves me, and a past that haunts me. I wake up every day and try to be better. But I can't forget. I cheated. Not just on my husband, but on myself, on my beliefs, on the woman I used to be. And no matter how hard I pray, I don't think I'll ever truly be free. I remember the morning after like it was seared into my skin. The sun filtered through the linen curtains of his house, an elegant, colonial-style villa tucked into the hills above Molobo. The ocean was visible from the window, glistening, indifferent. It felt cruel that such beauty existed when I had just broken every promise I ever made. I lay there for a long time, pretending to sleep, listening to the rhythm of his breath. He was already up-dressed, groomed, the scent of expensive cologne trailing after him as he moved through the room. Botesa in Gonga was always composed, always precise. Even after what we had done, he didn't speak right away. He just left something on the nightstand beside me. I didn't look at it at first. I didn't want to look. But I knew what it was. Money. Not a lot, never enough to insult me, but never so little that it didn't carry weight. It was always in crisp envelopes. Clean. Neat. Professional. One time, there were even plane tickets inside Libreville, he said, just to clear your head. He called it help. I called it survival. But deep down, it felt like payment. That first morning, he sat at the foot of the bed. His voice was gentle. Use it to visit him, he said. He needs you. I wanted to scream. Don't you dare speak about him. Don't you dare pretend you're helping. But instead, I nodded. My voice was too broken to betray my rage. I took the envelope. And every time after that, I kept taking it. Because I told myself I had no choice. Because the trip to the prison was long, and the guards were corrupt, and they made me pay just to see my husband for 15 minutes behind glass. Because sometimes I had to bribe the wardens to let me bring food or clothes. Because there were lawyers to meet, forms to fill, gifts to offer. And because the world was not kind to a woman alone in Equatorial Guinea. But let me tell you something painful. Money given after love doesn't feel like love. It feels like debt. He would hand it to me as he buttoned his shirt, barely looking at me. Sometimes he kissed my forehead. Sometimes he said nothing at all. There were mornings I cried in the shower before he could see me. Other mornings I stared at myself in the mirror, whispering, just a few more months. Just until the appeal goes through. There was one terrible morning when I couldn't take the envelope. I pushed it back toward him. I'm not a prostitute, I said. His eyes narrowed just for a second. No, he said. You're a survivor. But it didn't feel like surviving. It felt like dying slowly in someone else's skin. That day, I didn't take the money. I went home with nothing. And I walked 5 kilometers under the burning sun just to save what little I had for the prison visit the next day. My shoes broke. I got blisters. When I finally reached the prison gate, the guard told me visiting hours were over. I begged. I cried. He told me to leave or he'd call the police. That night, I called Botesa. I told him I was sorry. I told him I made a mistake. The next morning, the envelope was there again. Bigger this time. And I took it. After a while, it became routine. Thursdays were our nights. Fridays were my visits. He always made sure the timing worked. He said he didn't want me to miss seeing my husband. I hated him for saying it. I hated how easily he twisted his manipulation into something noble. But I kept going back. Because the visit kept my husband sane. Because he would light up when he saw me walk in, as though my presence reminded him he still had a life waiting. He would ask me how I was, how things were going, if there was any word on his appeal. I lied through my teeth. I told him I had found work at a small clinic. That I was getting help from my cousin in Spain. That we were going to be okay. He believed me. I think that was the worst part. The more Balthasar gave, the more I needed. And not just the money. His power, his attention, his ability to make things happen. He pulled strings I didn't even know existed. Suddenly, my husband was being moved to a better block. He had access to books. A new lawyer arrived, pro bono, claiming to be just interested in the case. It wasn't magic. It was Balthasar. And I was the cost. One day, he took me to an estate outside of Bata. We stayed for 3 days. I was supposed to feel pampered, but I felt like a possession. I spent half the time sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out at the sea, wondering if this would ever end. When I came home, I found a small velvet box in my bag. A bracelet. Gold. Engraved. Inside it said, even in silence, you belong to me. I threw it in a drawer and never wore it again. But I didn't throw it away. Because I did belong to him. And as much as I hated it, some part of me, some dark, hollow part clung to it. Because it felt like someone wanted me. Because guilt had become my only form of comfort. I would leave his house early in the morning, always before the staff arrived. He said it was safer that way. Cleaner. Sometimes I would walk past his driver, who would nod without meeting my eyes. Everyone knew, even if no one said anything. And the envelope was always there. Sometimes it came with a note. Be strong. Don't let them see you cry. Soon, this will be over. But it never really ended. It just changed shape. Even now, years later, when I walk past certain hotels or smell his cologne on a stranger, I feel a knot twist in my stomach. I remember the way the morning light looked through his window. The way the money rustled. The sound of betrayal, wrapped in kindness. And I wonder, who was I in those moments? A wife. A traitor. A victim. A survivor. Maybe I was all of them. Maybe I still am. Balthasar asked me to leave my husband. The first time Balthasar mentioned divorce, it was like the room froze around us. It was a humid night in June. The kind where the sky hangs heavy over the city, like it's holding a breath it can't release. We had just returned from a formal dinner with several high-ranking government officials. I was wearing a black satin dress he had bought me, one that clung to my skin in a way I hated but wore anyway because I knew how he liked it. We were sitting in his study, the air thick with silence and the slow swirl of his cigar smoke. He was nursing a glass of single malt. I was staring at the floor, exhausted. My body was with him, but my mind was back in that prison room, where my husband had smiled at me with sunken eyes just 2 days earlier. I've been thinking, Balthasar said softly, almost too softly, about your future. I didn't respond. I knew that tone. That measured, diplomatic calm. It meant he was about to say something dangerous. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. You know this isn't sustainable. You and him. My heart stuttered. You're wasting yourself, he continued. Tied to a man who's only halfway alive. Prison doesn't end when the sentence ends. It stays with them. He won't be the same. You know that. And you. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You deserve more than visiting rooms and broken promises. I stood up, instinctively. Like I could walk away from the poison in the room. But he followed me. You think this is about me being selfish, he said. But I see the truth. I see what you don't want to admit. You've been carrying this man's guilt, his mistakes, for years. What has it cost you? Your peace, your freedom, your dignity. I love him, I whispered. It felt like a child's protest. Weak, frail. Balthasar scoffed. You loved him. Once. Before everything. But what is love now? Habit. Guilt. Pity. He stepped closer. I could give you a new life. You wouldn't have to lie anymore. You wouldn't have to sneak into prison gates or pretend you're someone you're not. You could walk beside me in the open. You could breathe. And then he said it. Divorce him. It hit me like cold water. Not just the suggestion but the calm certainty in his voice. Like he had already decided for me. No, I said quickly. Don't ask me that. You don't get to ask me that. Why not? He countered. You gave me your body. You sleep in my arms. You take my money. You let me clean up his messes, and yet you still pretend you're his wife. I turned to him, my face burning with shame. Because I am his wife. He stared at me for a long time. Then he laughed, bitterly. No, you're not. You're mine. You've been mine for months. And you know it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the truth is I didn't move. I stood there, crumbling, because some part of me knew he was right. I had built two lives, one built on loyalty and memory, the other on survival and lust. And I was clinging to both, hoping neither would shatter first. But Balthasar didn't stop. He tried again the following week. And the next. Always gently, always at the right moment after a fight with the prison guards, after a day when I found out my husband's appeal had been rejected, after I had spent hours crying in Balthasar's bed. He would whisper things to me. He'll drag you down with him. You're not a martyr. You're a woman. You're not leaving love behind, you're leaving a grave. And slowly, I began to bend. I started imagining what life could look like without the visits. Without the lying. Without the fear of being seen with Balthasar in public. I imagined having a bank account in my name again. I imagined traveling without guilt. Waking up without dread. I started drafting the papers. Quietly. Alone. But every time I held the pen, I remembered my husband's face, how it lit up when he saw me walk into that cold, grey visiting room. How he held my hand through the glass like I was his only reason to keep breathing. How could I tell that man that while he was locked away, I had given myself to the architect of his downfall? One night, I finally confronted Balthasar. If I divorce him, I won't forgive myself, I said. I'll hate myself forever. He stepped behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. But I'll forgive you, he said. Isn't that enough? I cried that night until I couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was starting to believe him. Not because he was right, but because I was tired. Because sometimes, guilt isn't enough to stop the fall. And sometimes, forgiveness, especially from the wrong person, feels like a rope in a storm. I never signed the papers. Not then. But I kept them in the drawer. And every day, as the silence between me and my husband grew louder, and Balthasar's grip around my life tightened, I looked at them and wondered. Was love really worth dying for, if all I ever did was suffer in its name? The day my husband came home from prison was the first time in years that I wore white. A cotton dress, modest and clean, like some subconscious attempt at absolution. The house smelled like citrus and bleach. I had spent hours scrubbing it, chasing away shadows, pretending I could make the place feel untouched, like I hadn't let another man feel the bed, the walls, my body. But guilt has a scent. And even bleach can't hide it. When he stepped through the door, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, but gained something else, an edge in his eyes, like someone who had seen too much and said too little for too long. He kissed me like a man remembering how. Slow. Searching. I wept in his arms, and when he asked why, I told him it was relief. In truth, it was grief. For the lies I had hidden under my skin like splinters. For weeks, we played house. I cooked. He fixed things around the place, drawers that hadn't opened in years, the leaky faucet, a photo frame that had cracked while he was away. But the things that needed fixing most, the trust, the intimacy, those stayed broken. He noticed it before I did. How I flinched when he touched my lower back. How I avoided his eyes when he undressed. How I answered calls in the bathroom with the door locked. He asked questions, gently at first. I lied, gently at first. But the space between our truth widened like a crack in old plaster. Then one night, I made a mistake. Balthasar had called. I told him to stop. That my husband was home. That this couldn't happen again. But he only laughed. You think you can erase me that easily? After everything I gave you, he asked. His voice was silk over steel. You don't get to walk away. I should have changed my number. But I didn't. And one morning, I forgot to delete the call log. My husband found it. He didn't scream. He didn't even ask who it was. He simply stared at the screen for a long time, then handed me the phone like it was a corpse. How long? He asked. I froze. Silence spread between us like wildfire. A few months, I said. A few months, he repeated, as if testing the shape of the words. While I was in prison. I nodded, ashamed. But he laughed. A short, bitter thing that didn't reach his eyes. I knew, he said. Not the details. But I knew. He sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at the floor. I used to picture you, he said. When I couldn't sleep. I imagined you brushing your hair, cooking eggs, watering the plants. I told myself you were waiting. That all the time I was serving, you were serving it too. I needed to believe that. I fell to my knees in front of him. I didn't mean to, I whispered. I was alone. I was hungry. He was there. But you let him in, he said. You let him touch what was mine. His voice broke then. Not with rage but devastation. And then came the part one wasn't prepared for. I want to meet him, he said. I shook my head, panicked. No, please. That's not a good idea. But he stood up, his face made of stone. If you loved him enough to betray me, I need to see the man worth the price. I tried to stop him. I begged. But some truths don't stay buried. And some men don't walk away from betrayal without blood in their eyes. It took him less than 2 days to find Balthasar. He followed me. I was meeting Balthasar in a hotel lounge, just to say goodbye. At least, that's what I told myself. When I arrived, Balthasar greeted me with a kiss I didn't return. Changed your mind? He asked, already smug. But before I could answer, I saw him. My husband. Standing by the entrance. Watching. Time stopped. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked toward us, calm as a man heading into a storm he already knew would drown him. Balthasar stood. You must be the husband, he said, with more courtesy. My husband said nothing. Just stared at me. Was it worth it? He finally asked me. Did he make it easier? And then, to Balthasar, you think because you had her body, you have her heart. Balthasar smiled. I never needed her heart. Just her choice. And that was the moment my husband broke. The fight was brutal and silent, like something out of a dream. A blow to the jaw. a cracked glass, blood on the collar of a white dress. Security broke it up before police arrived. No charges were pressed. Botesa had his connections. But the damage was done. That night, my husband packed his things. I can't live in a house where I see him in the walls, he said. I forgive you. But I don't know if I can still love you. I watched him leave, suitcase in hand. Just like that, the man I had waited for, prayed for, became a memory I couldn't hold on to. And Botesa, he still calls, still waits. But I haven't answered. Because now I know something neither man ever understood. I wasn't choosing between them. I was trying to remember who I had been before either one of them tried to own me. And maybe, just maybe, that woman still exists. Somewhere past the ruins.